I better keep the water up here in case I get that tickle on my throat again. It's on full. All right. If you will join with me in standing for the reading of the gospel. Hear now the word of the Lord. Now when the Pharisees and some of the scribes who had come from Jerusalem gathered around him, they noticed that some of his disciples were eating with defiled hands, that is, without washing them. For the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they thoroughly wash their hands, thus observing the tradition of the elders. And they do not eat anything from the market unless they wash it. And there are also many other traditions that they observe, the washing of cups, pots, and bronze kettles. So the Pharisees and the scribes asked him, "Why do your disciples not live according to the tradition of the elders, but eat with defiled hands?" He said to them, "Isaiah prophesied rightly about you hypocrites. As it is written, the people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching human precepts as doctrines. You abandon the commandment of God, and you hold to human tradition." Then he called the crowd again and he said to them, "Listen to me, all of you. Understand, there is nothing outside a person that by going in can defile, but the things that come out are what defile. For it is from within, from the human heart, that evil intentions come: fornication, theft, murder, adultery, avarice, wickedness, deceit, licentiousness, envy, slander, pride, folly. All these things come from within, and they defile a person." This is the word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
Last week in my sermon, I quoted the great Christian teacher. He's actually out of New Orleans, so I don't know that he's widely known. But he's a great Christian teacher named Brennan Manning. Wrote a lot of nice books about kind of helping us see the gospel of grace differently even. But I quoted him last week. He said that the greatest single cause of atheism in this world today is Christians who acknowledge Jesus with their lips, walk out the door, and deny him by their lifestyle. That is what an unbelieving world simply finds unbelievable. You may remember that from last week. So what Manning is essentially saying in this quote is that Christian hypocrisy is the greatest cause of atheism, and I don't think he's wrong. I mean, have you ever heard anyone say, I don't go to church because the church is full of hypocrites? Anybody, you ever heard anybody say that? Well, I had a good friend say this back to me when I was in college. And so how would you respond to that? Like, how do you respond when people say, I don't go to church because the church is full of hypocrites? Well, in one of my better moments, this is what I said to him. I said, yes, you're right. The church is full of hypocrites, and I'm one of them. And that's why we hypocrites go to church, because we need to be in a place that challenges us to do better. And in my experience, most people in church are trying to do better. And I told him, I said, but until you go to church and see that for yourself, don't talk to me about hypocrisy. Now, he didn't have an answer for that, so he started going to church. And today he is an ordained Baptist pastor and teaches at a Christian college. He is the acting dean of this Christian college. He teaches at. Now, we talked on the phone a couple of weeks ago, and he actually reminded me of this story. I did not remember it. Well, I kind of remembered it. Now, it doesn't work that way all the time. You can have a great answer, and it doesn't have the effect. I got lucky. This time it did work, but that's actually been kind of my standard answer over the years. And I get that statement a lot when people say that. But I think, there's truth to the criticism that the church is full of hypocrites. We all say one thing, and then we do another about certain things. Everybody's sin is different. Your hypocrisy is different from mine. But all people practice hypocrisy at times. It's not just a disease of the church. Everybody falls short of their ideals at times. But the difference is the stakes are higher for us. The stakes are higher for the church when Christians practice hypocrisy. It's because we preach a higher way. We believe and we proclaim a truthful way to live. We believe it's the right way to live. And sometimes the things that we believe, it goes against the grain of the world. They don't like it, right? And so the world is already skeptical of us inside this building. And we just give the world more reason to be skeptical when we don't live up to what we believe and what we proclaim. So we all know this. We have to be a little more careful as we walk in the world because the world is watching us. So why am I talking about hypocrisy? Well, if you paid attention to the reading, you'll see that it just doesn't seem like a very uplifting sermon topic. But it's because in our reading today, Jesus calls the religious leaders of his day, he calls them hypocrites. And, we've had our fair share of religious leaders who have preached one thing and done another. When a pastor falls short of his calling, it makes the news these days. I almost see something every week, it seems, of a religious leader in the church falling short. And sadly, too many have made the news in recent decades. So much so that pastors are no longer at the top tier of the most trusted professions. We used to be kind of at the top. Anybody know what's number one? Yeah. And a drip of sarcasm from down your chin right there. So yeah, that didn't even make the list. It's nurses. It's nurses. 78% of the people trust nurses. Pastors in 2019 fell to 40%. You know what we are in 2023? 32%. Y'all, that is scandalous. It is absolutely scandalous. So Jesus says that some of the clergy of his day are hypocrites. But let's be honest. If you read this reading, don't we kind of side with the religious leaders on this one? I mean, did you read? The disciples were not washing their hands before they ate. That's one of the first things we teach our children. Wash your hands before you eat. Wash your hands when you come out of the bathroom. Make sure you wash your hands. And especially since the pandemic, we're all more mindful of washing our hands. I'm going to use hand sanitizer before communion. We didn't used to do that. And here in the pews, I can see one over there, we have hand sanitizer in the pews, though I got to wonder, why does it say on the bottles, do not drink? Did somebody take a swig in here? Fess up now. There was one in my office. The first day in the office, I looked at it. Hand sanitizer, do not drink. I had a good laugh over that. Now, it's okay. I get it. Now, why would Jesus call them hypocrites over this? Because washing hands before meals, that's a good Jewish law, right? In fact, it says that they were clean about everything. They were clean all around. Being clean keeps you healthy. It's a good thing. So if you think about it, the religious leaders could have rightly called Jesus and his disciples hypocrites because they were good Jews and they weren't following the law. They weren't living up to the law that they believed in. But the religious leaders didn't call them hypocrites. In fact, if you read the text, it looks like they just asked a simple question, an innocent question. Why do your disciples not walk in accordance to the tradition of the elders, but they eat with defiled hands? It seems that it reads like a very simple question, a fair question. Seems like accountability to me, to be honest with you. I mean, can we really argue with the religious leaders in our reading today? Jesus' disciples were not only disregarding the Jewish law, they were being gross. They were being gross. So why would Jesus call them hypocrites over what reads like a fair question? Because Jews are supposed to eat before they wash their hands before they eat. Well, Jesus is leading a new movement. It seems right that the clergy would want to know why they weren't following the Jewish law. But remember, this wasn't the first time the clergy went after Jesus. They had been playing this game of gotcha with Jesus for a while. They were already skeptical of Jesus, so they were looking for ways to catch him, not following the law. Just like the world's already skeptical of us, they look for ways sometimes to catch us in inconsistency in our behavior. Now, remember, the religious leaders, they criticized them for healing on the Sabbath, for picking grain on the Sabbath, and for eating with sinners, okay? Those seem like a lot more fair, but they were playing a game with gotcha. But in every single criticism they lodged against Jesus, the religious leaders showed that they were more concerned with the trees than they were missing the beauty of the forest. They failed to see the beauty in Jesus' teaching because they couldn't get past some of his behavior. And you know what? We do that to ourselves. We do it to ourselves. Too many of us get so hung up on our own imperfections that we fail to see our own beauty. But we also get hung up on the imperfections of others and we fail to see their beauty. It's easy to do in this world today. We get hung up, and in the church we get hung up on one issue sometimes and we just miss the forest for the trees. But the Bible has a clear hierarchy of morality. There's a very clear hierarchy of morality. There are some moral teachings that are higher than the others. 10 Commandments are right up there. The Sermon on the Mount, chapters 5, 6, and 7 in Matthew, up there. And then the greatest of the commandments, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and your neighbor as yourself. Those are the most important commandments to follow. The other little commandments in the Bible are not unimportant, But these are kind of the big ones. But too often we'll elevate the small stuff over the big stuff. And so Jesus' point in our reading today is look at your heart first. Look at your heart first. Worry about the impurities of your heart before you go bothering with other people's impurities. Because if you look close enough at your heart, this is what he's saying to the religious leaders. If you look close enough at your heart, you're probably going to be as scandalized by yourself as you are these dirty disciples. And you'll likely be less inclined to judge other people. And that's what Jesus meant when he said in Matthew 7, he said, take a gander at the log in your own eye before you start looking at the dirt in somebody else's. Because we are all dirty somewhere. In a former church, one of the members, it's back in Mississippi, he came to me and he was scandalized by a beggar outside of Walmart. The beggar asked for money to buy groceries, so the church member gave him a $5 bill. Now, the church member had more cash on him than that, but he was widely known and admitted himself he was kind of cheap. So he gave the beggar $5, and the beggar looked at the $5 bill and he said, that's not enough for me to buy groceries. Well, the church member came to me and he was hopping mad about this. And, he was just, he was fit to be tied. And he was mad at the ungratefulness of the beggar. And he told me, I'm never giving to a beggar again. Admittedly, I might have been a little perturbed too. If I handed someone money and they were kind of ungrateful. Even though he did have a point, you can't buy much even at Walmart with $5. Dorothy Day is one of my heroes. I don't know if you've ever heard of Dorothy Day, but she's one of the great American saints in my opinion. And she started hospitality houses for the poor in New York City. And she once said this about the poor. She said, there are two things you should know about the poor. They tend to smell and they are ungrateful. Now, neither one of those things got in the way of Dorothy Day's mission and ministry to the poor. If she had gotten hung up on the dirtiness and the ungratefulness of the poor, she would not have made the kind of impact for the poor that she made, not just in New York City, but all around the world now. But we all get hung up on the little things sometimes, don't we? I do it all the time. I get hung up on the small stuff. We let the small stuff prevent us from seeing a bigger picture. Sometimes we'll let the small stuff keep us from doing the right thing. It's our reading from James says that our faith is worthless. It is worthless if we deceive our hearts. I think that is the root of hypocrisy, when we deceive our hearts to the point that we're quick to point out the sins of others without an honest self-awareness about the condition of our own heart. I think hypocrisy is just mostly a matter of not being self-aware about your own heart. Paul says in Romans 7, in one of my favorite verses in all the scripture, he goes, the desire to do good, it's inside of me, but I don't do it. I don't do the good I want to do. Instead, I do the bad stuff I don't want to do. Why do I do what I know I ought not do? We all relate to that. How often do you gossip when you know you shouldn't gossip, and you don't want to do it, but you catch yourself doing it anyway? We all relate to that. On the surface, it appears that Paul is saying in Romans 7, I'm a hypocrite, and he's right. But Paul has enough self-awareness. He has enough self-awareness that he recognizes it, and he desires to do better. But I think these religious leaders in our reading, they were a different kind of hypocrite. They got so hung up on the things that really don't affect your heart. That's the point here. Washing your hands may affect your health, but it has nothing to do with your heart. And if they had taken a look inside their own heart to see all of the ways that they failed to follow the law, they may not have been so hung up on the sins of others. And I think that's the kind of hypocrisy the world rejects, when we are way too focused on other people's sins. And I don't blame people for rejecting that. I don't blame people for criticizing us when we do that, because I think they're right. When I was a Catholic, I was assisting at a funeral for an infant. The father of the infant's son, he was Catholic, and the mother of the infant's son was a Methodist. It was the most emotional funeral I'd ever been a part of. It was also ratcheted up by the fact that my own son was in the hospital at the same time fighting for his life. The Methodist mom, she came to church every Sunday with the Catholic dad, but she never walked up for Holy Communion because she knew that it was against the rules for a non-Catholic to take communion in a Catholic church. But at this funeral for her infant son, there was one moment, one powerful moment that has just stuck with me all these years. After the priest finished giving communion to everyone at the funeral, he saw that the Methodist mom remained in her seat like she usually did on Sundays. And you could tell this priest wanted to give communion to her, communion to this grieving mom, but it was against the rules. So he begins to walk back to the altar, to return the bread and wine up to the altar. And about halfway, he stopped. And he turned around, and he walked back to the mom, and he offered her Holy Communion. And she broke down in tears, and she joyfully accepted his graceful gesture. And I lost it. You know, the priest could have, maybe should have, been rigid with the rules. He wasn't supposed to do what he did. In fact, there were some who criticized him for it because, you know, there are always a few of God's watchdogs in the church. But instead of worrying about that human-made rule, he followed the higher law of the communion table. The law of love, the law of grace. Let us take a moment of silence.